You're here for what you think you're here for. I don't know. Do you know that thing when you kind of go to a conference? And so, well, obviously you could be in the right place, but certainly not in this country. No, thank you ever so much for coming this afternoon. I'm guessing you're here under kind of one of three reasons. Either you're genuinely intrigued by my walk in the Camino de Santiago, or you're here because you actually want to know what I got up to. He talked about going on this walk. Did he just swan off to Spain for 5 weeks? Or you've heard that there's a possibility of cake afterwards. Maybe you kind of sit somewhere between the three of them. I don't know. Just to point out, this is being streamed, so if you do heckle, please keep it clean. But also, there is a slim possibility that there'll be others joining us. I know a number of people wanted it kind of recorded because they couldn't be here. But I do believe, and I'll explain who they are a bit later, that some of the squad may be joining us from across the pond. So if you are, hello to you guys as well. I've been in touch with them today and that sort of thing. Therefore, hopefully my reflections are honest this afternoon. I've had to edit it slightly. I'm aware that there may be others who kind of experience some of this who will be tuning in. But kind of the story begins, doesn't it? 779 kilometres, 484 miles, more than 1.2 million steps that I walked. Because my watch told me that, not because I was actually kind of going 1, 2. I lost count, that sort of thing. The most in one day was just over 54,000 steps that I managed. That was not actually on my longest day. My longest day, distance-wise, was 21.6 miles. The shortest being 3.6, but that was because I'd kind of injured myself because I'd gone too far, and so I had to have a shorter day. I was travelling, obviously, from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port in the south of France, across Spain to Santiago de Compostela. I arrived in Saint-Jean on September the 7th. It did actually make it in the end. It took me a while to even get there, but that's a whole other story. Starting out on the 8th. This was the guidebook that I followed as I went through. The plan was to walk it in 33 days. I'd allowed myself, or rather EasyJet had allowed me an extra day, because if I got there in 33 days, I'd have a day to kill before my flight home. So I knew I could possibly move that and do it a bit earlier if I needed to. But each day, it kind of breaks it down into a kind of a set amount with various points of interest along the way. So I had a rough idea where I was going and what I was planning. And back home, I had a second copy of this, an older copy, and I wanted a more up-to-date one, particularly following COVID, aware that might some things might change. So I cut up the old one and gave that to the family. And so next door, if you stay for a bit of cake, apologies if you're online, if you stay for a bit of cake, in the Manor House, you'll see each day they had a bit of the map to stick on to follow through. And basically, you have this orange line that goes through each day from the bottom of the page to the top of the page. I mean, it's that simple, really. Yeah. Each day I would begin, you'd head off, you'd follow the map, hoping to get to the other end of it. And in many ways, kind of thinking about this afternoon and what I was going to share, it's really actually been quite hard because I could talk for hours. In part because I would love to recount every little moment. I kept a journal throughout and took a fair few photos. So I kind of can go back and look, and there's so much. I was talking to someone a moment ago, though. The challenge is there's a lot of things that I'll find really interesting, where actually you'll go, that's just another picture of another field, Ed. It's no different to the 35 ones you've already shown us. So what I want to do is kind of this afternoon just kind of share a few of my thoughts, a few of the photos. I have edited it down from the 1,215 that I took. I've actually edited down further from the 700, which was the first edit, taking out all those that were out of focus or duplicates or that sort of thing. Talk us through them and share some reflections, and then afterwards you're welcome to come through, and if there's questions and that sort of thing, then I'll obviously happily answer them if I can. Talking of questions, there's two kind of main questions that everyone would ask as you're walking the Camino. The first one is, where are you from? The second one is, why are you walking? And then there'd be other possible questions that would be added in. Where are you going today? So what is your endpoint? Because although I was working on a 33-day plan, you didn't always keep to it. There were slightly different plans, that sort of thing. Have you booked a bed for the night? Which was a bone of contention for some, whether they were bookers and you'd have a bed or you'd just kind of walk and see where you'd end up. And are you going all the way to Santiago? Which may seem like a really obvious question, but there was a number of people who would do it in chunks, or so were coming back at a later stage, or had kind of already done part of it. There was one guy who he'd done it in 2 halves before, and he wanted to do it in its entirety in one go. My general response to those questions was obviously battle, but often it was more battle. London, it's just down from there. On the coast, and that sort of thing. Where are you going today? As I say, on the whole, I'd have a vague idea, though I can never pronounce the names of them. So I'd usually kind of go, it's, that place. And then they'd say, okay, yeah, that's it. And that's how I'd kind of work it. Have you booked a bed? I didn't on the whole, up until about the last 4 or 5 days, I think it was. There was a kind of a group of us who we booked ahead. And were you going all the way to Santiago? On the beginning, it was much more a case of that was my plan. You didn't want to get too confident, really, but very much that's what I was about. And why are you walking? Well, the answer to that question, I wouldn't say changed as I walked, but I think there was clarity that came to how I would explain it. Whereas I probably waffled quite a bit to start with, I actually, as I went along, formed much more coherently why I was there and what it was for me. So I'm going to break kind of the journey, if you will, the Camino, down into a few chunks. Initially, looking from the 8th to the 19th of September. So this was the first section that I went on from St. John Pied de Port to Burgos. So I got up at 5:28 on the 8th of September. There's me, looking fresh-faced and ready for anything. Yeah, he hasn't got a clue, has he? This was me just before I came out of my albergue, headed through St. John. Took me a while to get out of St. John and work out where I was going and that sort of thing. And you're then suddenly realizing I probably should have read up a bit more in terms of the routes. My idea was each day I'd just kind of take it as it comes and see where I'm going, that sort of thing. On the whole, you follow these arrows the whole way. But I, again, not really thought through. Well, the first 2 hours or so was kind of in the dark. So I quickly got my head torch out, realizing that was going to be useful. Made my way out of St. John and headed up into the Pyrenees, which is glorious in the dark. You can't see a thing. By about 7:30 or just before, though, the light had started to come up. This is a picture of me. It was taken by, the first person I met on that day was someone called Maggie from the US. She was sitting having breakfast, and we chatted and that sort of thing. She said, would I take a picture of her, and vice versa. And you suddenly realize that's something you're going to do a lot. You'll take a picture of someone else. You go, actually, this is a really nice view. And we headed on. Walking up through the Pyrenees, breakfast came at about 9:30 that day. On the map, it said there was a food van. And to begin with, you kind of go, what? Then you realize these things do exist. And there's a guy literally every day on the Pyrenees, and not kind of like a mile out from a town, just in the middle of nowhere, has this food truck. So there was me with my Coke, my hard-boiled eggs, and my bananas for breakfast on the first day. But walking through the Pyrenees, absolutely stunning. An amazing expanse, which I didn't realize you go through so quickly on the first day, and suddenly it's kind of almost gone. But as I say, there's a lot of wildlife. You have loads of cows, loads of horses, that sort of thing. And there was also a load of sheep running all over the place. And they literally just went on and on. They suddenly disappeared. We weren't sure if there was a steep drop the other side, and maybe they were suddenly, and then you'd hear them kind of going again later on. But it was a sound that you got used to. The end of the first day brought me to Roncesvalles, which was kind of an amazing kind of building and structure. I think there was about 190 beds, or certainly lots. So you kind of cram in. And began then the kind of the routine that would form kind of my next 5 weeks. This was the boot store at this particular, or half rather, of the boot store, this particular place. You'd arrive somewhere, they'd ask you to take your boots off, So you wouldn't take them into the kind of the bedrooms, that sort of thing. You'd have to put your poles, if you've got walking poles, in a tub somewhere again, so you don't take them in. You'd then unpack, well, you'd roll out your sleeping bag. You'd then have a shower, because you haven't really done that since the time previously, the day before. If you can, you go to a shop, get some food, probably have a nap. I'd write my journal. And before you know it, the afternoon's kind of gone. Dinner that first night was a pilgrim's meal. A pilgrim's meal, or a peregrino's meal, was something that was offered a lot. You'd start at main, dessert, with wine on the side, usually for about 10 euros, give or take. So certainly it maybe wasn't the highest quality, but was good value. And that was where I sat around a table with 11 others. Beautiful moment when the guy across from me, as we're eating away, suddenly goes, "Oh yeah, your queen's died today, hasn't she?" I didn't know at that point because I'd switched off from everything. But it was this kind of almost bizarre conversation that then kind of didn't obviously go anywhere. But you're slowly getting to know people. Some people you stayed in touch with, others you didn't. Day 2, then I got up again early. This sign was just outside the albergue, which is the name for like the hostels you stay in. It does say 790 kilometres. That would mean I'd only done 9 kilometres the day before, which I hadn't. I'd done more than that. I think this may have been down to the fact that it was on the road. Also, most of the signs didn't seem to add up, let's just be honest. You walk along and you'd kind of pass somewhere that would say, kind of, okay, 600k. And then you'd walk a bit further and then it would say 625k. And then you walk somewhere further and go, 607k. So up until about the last 100k, you didn't really trust the signs. Another breakfast on day 2, enjoying it with these guys this occasion, though. That guy looks a bit shifty on the left. Thankfully, there was a hedge between me and them at this point. But again, throughout the country, you're seeing all this kind of like wildlife all around. The first, that night, I reached Zubiri, where again went into the albergue. I stayed at the Municipal, which is like the government-run, kind of pretty bog standard, pretty basic. And that was the room that I stayed in. I had one of those bunk beds. This was one of the rooms where one of companions, guys I got to know, pointed out bed bugs, how you can tell if a place has had bed bugs. I'm not going to go into how you know that, but you can work it out very easily. So I didn't sleep that well that night because you're thinking second day in, I don't really want. But I met up with others. This is a picture of Chelsea, it's me obviously, Yuel and Brian. Chelsea and Brian are from the States, Yuel from the Holy Land. Had a wonderful day. It was a glory. That was almost the hottest day, I think. So we're dabbling our feet in the stream. But lovely just getting to know people. And then the next day, kind of again, headed off at 5 a.m., headed for Pamplona on this occasion. There's me waiting outside the albergue. And you can see the row of bags, which again was that kind of classic thing. You'd get there, you'd get your bag in line so you could get your spot. Again, this albergue, being a city, had about, I think, 120 beds or more maybe. So it wasn't actually that packed if you were there prompt enough. But again, and went to explore the city and met up with various people who I'd already started to connect with a few days in. This is Robert. He's a Dutchman. That may mean nothing to you. If you've seen the film The Way, which was a big reason I discovered it and wanted to go, Martin Sheen's character meets a Dutchman. I'm going to embarrass her. Evie said there was 2 things she wanted me to do. She wanted me to order tapas, which is another bit in the film, and she wanted me to meet a Dutchman. It took me till day 3 to realise he'd introduced himself from the Netherlands. It took me till day 3 to think, oh yeah, he's a Dutchman. But we had lunch together, and a glorious gluten-free lunch as well, which I was very pleased about. That was something I was a bit unsure about. But heading out, once again, the surroundings were just amazing. This was just heading out the morning after Pamplona, you know, as the sun is rising, just glorious. And the photos just aren't going to capture it at all. But we soon reached that day the monument to pilgrims at Alto del Pardon. If you were here this morning, I mentioned that my Spanish pronunciation is pretty poor, if worse than that. But just roll with it. 33 days in Spain didn't really help. Apologies, Miriam. So we can't do much about that. But an amazing structure that just looks out, and you can kind of, again, a classic symbol and image of the Camino. And as I was doing this, getting to know different people, I walked up out of Pamplona with a group, and then this was the next night, that night in Puerto Lorena. We're literally sitting on the street, so there are cars going right past us as we're eating our dinner here, as you do, and not slowing down either. I would have slowed down. But again, starting to meet people, some of who I would kind of travel the rest of the way with, seeing them off and on. Others I didn't see again after that night. It was an evening, though, where I was taught how to eat bacon. This was my meal, and there was kind of crispy bacon in it, and Leanne and Erin from the US were kind of not pleased with the way I was eating bacon with a knife and fork. Apparently in the US you don't do that. So I had a long lesson in that. Yesterday we actually had some bacon at home, and I got a picture of me eating it with my fingers, and I sent it to Erin, and she just replied just said proud, and this kind of like tear in her eye, because it's like I'd finally discovered how it was meant to be done. As I say, slowly starting to get to know people. This is Brian and Chelsea and Stefan in the middle. Again, you kind of start to connect with people maybe who are similar age to you or similar outlook, but also people who are totally different. And that was one of the things I really loved, was the diversity of people you met and the reasons people were walking as well. There's no kind of one reason you could say, oh, that was the most reason people were doing it. There's a whole spread of different reasons. And we walked on to a place called Estella together, not to be confused with Estrella, which is the famous Spanish beer. And there isn't beer in that cup, but the place we stayed was known as, it's kind of like a donativo, where they ask for a donation, and it's run by volunteers. So we arrived, and once we've queued and they've kind of opened the doors, the guy comes out with glasses of fresh cold water with a bit of lemon in it. And he's greeting you, and he takes you in small groups, and he's very much trying to be friendly. And he actually then took us on a tour of two of the churches, if we wanted to, in Estella, and was explaining all the kind of significance of the buildings and the architecture and that sort of thing. And that was something for him that he wanted to offer to pilgrims. And you'd meet these different people who would do it. Not all of them were like this. A lot of people, it was their job to host and to run the albergues. But you met all sorts of people. This is a guy called Lance, who is from America, but has got Scottish heritage. And so he walked the entire thing in a kilt. Just, again, capturing something of the variety. A great guy. Was really good to get to know. So I left Estella and saw all sorts of things. That morning, leaving it, I came across the infamous wine fountain. You may have heard of this. This is a fountain on the right-hand side, it gives water. On the left-hand side, it gives wine. It gives wine after 8 a.m. And I was there about before 6, I think. So you could taste. There was some little bits of it that were left, sort of thing. But apparently they don't put it in till 8 a.m. And the people who came later on had shown me videos. They'd got some, and that thing didn't really taste that bad, that great, really. So I'm not that kind of miffed that I'd missed it, sort of thing. But as I say, each day you kind of would plan destinations. But didn't always keep to them. Sometimes I'd go on a bit further. Other days I'd kind of pull back a bit. I'd planned to leave Estella with Brian and Chelsea and Stefan and walk on with them, but wasn't able to because Brian wasn't well. So walked on mainly by myself for the next day, and I planned to go to this place called Los Arcos. That was the end of the stage, so that's what I was going to do. And I got to Los Arcos quite early, and I went into a shop to buy breakfast or second breakfast, I can't remember. It was cheese and a packet of Haribo, I recall, on that occasion. And I said to this lady who I recognised as a pilgrim, because she had, on her bag, she had a scallop shell. And this was the way you could tell who was, walking on pilgrimage, a symbol of it. I said, would you just watch my bag while I go into the shop, because it was a very small shop. And I came out and I was chatting to her, and I said, are you heading on to, where are you heading on to? And she goes, I'm going on to a place called San Sal, which was like another 6-7 on. And I said, I was going to stop here. And she said, oh, no, you've got to go on. It's just the most amazing building, an amazing place. They've only opened it about 6 months ago. So I head on, and this is this old stately home would be the best way I would describe it. Grand open staircases, hosted by this guy called Ben, who was there for, I think, 2 months, kind of looking after it. The owner was 77. He'd spent 7 years doing it up. so he could then have kind of pilgrims come and stay. And this was one of the highlights that Ben pointed out to me. So here you can make out some tired pilgrims heading towards Santiago. This is the spot that Ben, the Dutch guy who is looking after this place, decides to come out and watch them walking wearily here. I mean, that was me an hour or more ago, but there is actually something quite satisfying about it. Probably quite wrong, but quite satisfying. It was really great. And it was here that I had my first communal meal. So food, you could either kind of organise yourself and that sort of thing, but this was kind of, everyone was invited. You obviously paid for it often, that sort of thing. I was sitting with a guy called Phil and a guy called Dave, who were just on the right-hand side. They're from Manchester, and there was a guy called Roger here, actually, took the photo. And, you know, it was amazing just getting to know different people. But then kind of heading onwards, a massive part of the Camino was like this. You're just walking along paths. You haven't really got a clue where you're going, apart from these yellow arrows or signs that you're following along the way. I went through one place called Vienna, not Vienna, although I did stand by the sign and sing that on a video, which I found quite amusing, where they were running with the bulls. Again, it was a bit later than when I was there, but there was others who I met who had actually run with them and literally took their lives in their hands. I went through a place called Logrono, where I came across a rose that had been grown particularly for the Camino. Went through a place called Najare, where I walked up on this hill, and there was the most amazing rainbow that literally was one of those ones that went right from one side to the other. And you kind of go through these places, and at the time, it's the total centre of your universe. Give it a couple of days, and you can barely remember where you've been. And people say, "Where did you come from this morning?" And you're like, I remember I got out of bed, but I can't quite tell much more, sort of thing. A few days on, though, we arrived in a place called Granon, which was a lovely little village, and we got to stay at this Donativo, St. Jean-Baptiste, this church, and literally slept on the floor of the church. That's what they provided you. You could have a little mat. This was the moment where I realised I was really pleased I'd taken an inflatable pillow. Most of the time, you'd get a pillow provided, and then you'd get either a disposable or, in really nice places, an actual sheet to put on the bed. And here they just literally gave you that brown mat on the floor, and it was literally like kind of on a wing of the church. So it was literally to the right-hand side, the wall on the right-hand side. We were like just behind that on the first floor. And spent the afternoon kind of playing cards and using the free Wi-Fi from the local cafe because they didn't have any at the church, and eating some great chunky bacon as well. Before we had another communal meal. Now this one was very special. It was cooked by a group of Italians who, again, I didn't get to know, but I kind of saw on regular intervals along the trip. And as they've kind of finished, they then pipe up and start singing.
Voglio di non avere più risorse senza di te. E allora io quasi perché vengo da te. Ma vengo dei desideri, nei miei pensieri all'incontrario. Basta.
Lovely, a bit of after-dinner entertainment. What could be greater? It's now about 9:15. We're getting tired, but the host then decided, does anyone else want to sing? And so they then start going round everyone else who would like to sing and bring an item. I don't know what time it got to, but it's now getting you kind of going, I'm ready for bed at this point. One of our kind of group we were with very clearly was, and when they were asked to sing, they said, no, it's time to go. So at that point, we then moved into, the next activity before we could leave, which was washing up, okay? Now, you think washing up, that's not that bad. Everyone does it from time to time. The system they had, though, was we had 8 giant bowls of water, which were cold, bizarrely, the first bowl had kind of soap and stuff in it, and then you'd kind of wash it in there, and then you put it through 3 bowls of cold water, and then someone else would take it and dry it, sort of thing. By this point, I'd certainly kind of lost it, really, because it was just one of those surreal experiences. I tried to capture it on camera. Have a look.
Do something.
But generally just got told off. But it was one of the most bizarre things I've ever experienced. But great fun. And in many ways, that's part of what it was as well. The whole experience, you have these moments that just make no sense whatsoever. But the next morning we headed on. Met up with, this is a guy called Gavin and Bill, who are from New Zealand, who again saw sporadically along, got to know them a bit more, before ending up in a place called Bellarado. And Bellarado is a place that I will remember because I came across this. I mentioned the film The Way, one of the reasons I kind of was interested in the Camino. Throughout the town, there are various footprints in the floor that had been kind of marked by different Spanish people on the whole. This one I found, which was of Martin Sheen back in 2009 when he was filming The Way. So that was kind of one of those highlights for me, which everyone else was just like, what? Why are you taking a picture of that, Ed? Another one for me, though, was, again, another communal meal. This time, we got to enjoy some gluten-free pasta, which we'd managed to find, which, again, was, a real point for me. The next day, though, we headed on. It started out quite cold. This is when it actually kind of the sun had started to rise by about 9 o'clock. Heading out kind of 5 in the morning, I'd often, the first few days I was there in the shorts and T-shirts, but then it started to get a bit cooler. You'd starting the day with a jumper. Towards the end, it was with a coat as well. And the whole change in temperature was something that you really kind of noticed throughout the different kind of areas that you went through. Now, to some extent, people might say, well, you walk 500 miles. Of course, you're going to notice a difference in the temperature. But it was really interesting, the different areas, and also with the altitude. Here's a place that we went to. It took me ages to get there, which we didn't stop at. Just checking you're still awake, you see. We decided to go on a little further to a place called Acapulco, which was a lovely little place. This was me having just got there. We'd walked on a bit further than where we planned, so I just kind of collapsed. And then we enjoyed another healthy lunch. I think it was cheese and pepperoni for me, and another can of Coke. But glorious, just sitting around, again, meeting different people, that sort of thing. The next day brought one of our, the first major stop in being Burgos, reaching the outskirts of the city. Lots of crazy roads, kind of quite wide roads you're walking through, then the inner city and the outskirts. I took a closer picture of this one to show, this was the scallop shell, which again was on lots of signs, and this I think was the biggest that we saw. But guiding you into the city. And they were great at getting you into the cities. You always know exactly where you were going as you followed through. There were also kind of smaller kind of markings, often in the floor you'd find them. This was one that is probably about 10 centimetres across. You could buy these when you got to Santiago if you wanted to, which I thought would be quite interesting. And then I saw the price tag of about £90. I thought, I know how to get home. I don't need this to be out there sort of thing. And obviously in the cities, the cathedrals were a big part of it. You go around, if you ever travel to Spain, the architecture is just amazing. And inside as well, absolutely magnificent in the construction and the creation of these places. For me, it was the stained glass windows that always caught my imagination. Although in some respects, reflecting back on some of the buildings, I suppose coming from kind of my, tradition, if you will, you see it through a different lens. But it was really interesting talking with others, both those who were Catholics or kind of, had grown up in the Catholic Church or no kind of faith whatsoever, to hear their inspiration and input on it. Another highlight of Burgos was the gluten-free food. I sent this picture to Evie because, oh no, that's me just wrestling the statue. We've got the one of the food. Oh no, we're a bit behind. There we go. Which just the sight of it, I thought that's better than kind of Tesco's, really. So, it's a long way to go if you're going this sort of thing. So this then brought me on to kind of phase 2, if you will, onwards to Leon. Leaving Burgos, this was kind of the location from The Way, So I took loads of photos at this point as they kind of leave one of the cities, and the gypsy father gets his son to carry Martin Sheen's bag, if you've seen it. That's where it is. There is a wall just behind me, though, which is not in the film. So that's where it all kind of falls apart, really. But you now head into a place you may have heard of called the Meseta. The Meseta basically is long, flat, and there is nothing to see. And it just keeps on being long, flat, and nothing to see. Except you have the signs every so often, often with words of wisdom. This one says at the top, when the wind blows, some make walls, other windmills. There you go. I don't know what that means. And it was really interesting what the different wisdom that people felt they needed to leave. But for me, a lot of it was that space just to reflect and to pray and just to enjoy the stillness. Reached a place called Jonilas del Camino. This was where, having kind of worked through the Meseta, this is where I should have stopped. And this was a place you could see there was a sign that Martin Sheen did actually stop here. He's put a signature on his poster, and it's up on one of the, obviously whether he stayed at that particular albergue or B&B, I don't know. But with the kind of group I was with, we pressed on. And this was the moment where I probably should have stopped. Basically, I was a bit of an idiot. And so I kept walking, even when my legs were kind of going, I'm not quite sure at this point. So we finally reached our destination, or new destination for the day. Enjoy another pilgrim's meal. This was the paella that was on offer. Wasn't really just a bowl of rice, if you ask me. And that's what was really there, sort of thing. But headed on the next day, thinking, I'll be fine. I'll walk it off. What's the worst that can happen? As an aside, there were sunflowers everywhere. You see these fields of these sunflowers. Although most of them had kind of gone over. And actually talking with different people, they're saying because of the weather, they were going to be useless. So it wasn't even a case they'd be able to use them for anything more than just kind of animal feed. But stopped for breakfast. This wasn't quite up there with the first day van. It was actually more of a knockoff version. So everything was like it was from Lidl that the guy was selling. So it wasn't real Coke. And the banana wasn't great. And this was actually, I'm taking some ibuprofen there at this point. Because this was just after, again, because my legs, there's been a really steep hill, which I'd walked down backwards, because I worked out that was less painful than walking forwards. Which again, maybe at this point, I should have actually thought, maybe I should have stopped sooner. But I reached Bodilla, del Camino, and that's where I did stop. And that's when my legs said I've had enough. And so I rested there for the night, deciding to do my short day, my 3.6 the next day. The next morning, headed on. This was a guy called Steve, who I'd got to know from Australia. Really interesting character, which I will maybe go into at another time. But it was brilliant because that morning, or the night before, I'd sat next to Steve and his wife Janine, and they'd said, we've got to know you over the last few days, but what do you do? And so I then said, this is what I do. I'm a Baptist minister and that sort of thing. And I'm not sure how to take it, but their reaction was like, and what's one of those? And are you? Eh? But what was great there, the next morning as we left Bodilla de Camino, we walked on and we had the most intense conversation, all about faith and their experience of it, and kind of how was I at, and all this sort of stuff. And so it's amazing those opportunities that came throughout it to encounter and engage with these people. I went on to Framista, which was only, about 3 miles on, but I needed a rest. There's a glorious albergue I managed to find a bed in, and this was where I then did my washing. So this is what you do each day. If we can go back, you in a second. This is what you do each day is you'd wash kind of your stuff. There were tumble dryers and washing machines at some places, but on the whole, they weren't, or you've got to pay for them. So I had a little tube of washing stuff. You'd wash your socks mainly, and your underpants, and your T-shirt for the day. Those are the 3 things. You'd wash them, and then you'd kind of wring them out and hang them out to dry. And if you got out there quick enough, by the time you kind of went to bed at night, it'd all be dry. And that was very much part of the routine as well. The picture of the bunks I took, because this was a really good bedroom, because the person who owned it, they'd put some of that kind of polystyrene stuff around the rungs on the ladders, which you might think, what's that really needed for? But there were some ladders you'd climb up in some of these places. It was like they'd put knives on them, and they were almost just trying to spite you, but this place was a great sort of thing. So I headed out the next day feeling rested, and this was a day where there was an opportunity to go out on the road or by the forest. And I was thinking I'd like to go by the forest and by a river and that sort of thing. But there was someone I met who was at this cross point, and they were like, I want to go the shorter way, the road, but I don't want to go by the road on my own because it was still dark. So I said, I'll walk with you. So we walked on. We came across this place where there was teepees you could have stayed in if you so chosen to, sort of thing. And then we kind of went in, and they opened up, and they'd not even kind of begun at that time in the morning, opened up, and we were kind of had some coffee and that sort of thing. And there was a guitar in the room. Now, whenever there was a guitar along the way, someone would seem to pick it up, and 9 times out of 10, you'd get something by this band. Original as always. You travel, hundreds of miles, and all you get is Oasis. And it didn't matter whether what country they were from. That would be the kind of tune that would come out. So yeah, they serenaded my cup of coffee that morning. Yeah, I was the crowd, so that's why I was cheering, sort of thing. Heading on, headed to carry on. You can see another line forming, people gathering, personalised guides as well in the floor, showing you where you're meant to be going. This place was hosted by a group of nuns. They come for, I think, 2 months at a time from a nunnery, and they kind of ran it. In the evening, they had a time where everyone was invited to share, and they went around and literally said, so where are you from? Why are you walking the Camino? Which some people loved, some people didn't. And then we had a time of singing. So they led some songs, and other people led some songs. And again, was one of those amazing experiences in the moment. The next day started out really early, so it was dark, but there was a promise of another food van. This was the site. Something had driven past me in the kind of pitch black, and suddenly this appeared on the horizon. And so I'm walking along, and there's a guy who, again, these people just has a caravan, pulls up each day, and served the most, it was glorious tortilla, which I got to enjoy, but in the middle of nowhere. And walking on, again, it was a space by myself, very key, very, wonderful. This literally, and there's a few points where you just you could do a 360, and there was just no one. Maybe that's because I was very early in the morning. But it was truly amazing, a real experience. So walking on, obviously I've talked a bit about food and that sort of thing. These were, sustenance was key. These were key to me. I took a load of these with me. This was on, I think, about day 15. I'd managed to make 10 of them eke out each morning. That was, for the first few days, that was kind of my breakfast until I could get hold of something else, sort of thing. But as I say, the mornings were very special. First hour and a half to 2 hours, I'd be by myself. And there's something about, I reflected on it, watching the sun rise and watch it rise, 33 times is quite amazing. The 25th, though, was a very special day for me. I'd ended up on an alternative path by accident. And suddenly there was no one around, but I was thinking, sure, there should be someone around because there were people just behind me. But as the sun rose, and it was a Sunday morning, and it was just that something special about that day, for me, will always be one of my kind of key points on the journey. And just this kind of, highlight, if you will, of the whole trip. Soon after that, we came to Sahagún, which is actually the halfway point. We didn't stop there. You could get a halfway certificate if you wanted to, which again was one of those controversial things. Why would you want a certificate to say you got halfway if you're trying to get the whole way? I'm not casting aspersions on anyone who did. But we didn't stop there, carried on to Bercionas, which was another highlight. This was another Donativo, hosted by a Brazilian and his team. We got gazpacho soup that night. Which was one of the foods that I was trying to try while I was there. Again, Evie's Spanish teacher suggested a number of things that I could go for. Enjoyed this. And another communal meal with his team hosting. The guy in the apron was kind of the leader of the team. He was hilarious. The next morning at 6 o'clock, he put music on loudly, started turning all the lights on because he wanted people to leave. Because obviously they've got to get ready for the next group of pilgrims that are coming. He was very friendly and jolly about it, but at the same time he was like, yeah, it's time to go, sort of thing. And they actually provided me with a glorious gluten-free option that morning as well, sort of thing. So I felt very blessed there. Now this next sign, I think is meant to say 350 kilometres. I included it because I think it just reminds me of, again, how the signs were just so inaccurate. Or even incomplete, until like the last 100k. enjoyed another couple of days walking by myself before I reached Lyon at day 20. As you entered the city, I was handed a lollipop by these kind of half-official looking sort of people. Only spoke Spanish. We're obviously trying to welcome you and guide you, and somehow he worked out I was trying to stay at the municipal. He got this map out and was pointing me all these different locations I should go and see, and I was just trying to go, yeah, see. I have no real idea what he was talking about, but he gave me a free lolly, so I was happy about that sort of thing. So I headed to the municipal thinking they've been all right so far. The photo doesn't do it justice, but in the other extreme here, it felt just like what I imagine a prison camp to be like. It was in the basement. It was it wasn't damp, but it was cold. It wasn't nice. It was the only day that I actually thought, I'm not going to bother having a shower today. I'm just going to go back out in the sun and just, And Lyon was just amazing. The cathedral was something else. I remember messaging Emma saying it's the one place I definitely would love to come back and bring her back to, because it was just something else. I enjoyed my kind of do-it-yourself supermarket lunch, and then I went out we got some scallops and a baseless pizza in the afternoon, which is basically their answer to gluten-free. We're basically going to give you the toppings of a pizza on a plate without any base. So I had a plate full of cheese with some courgettes in it. It was different, but it did the job. And then went on a tour of the cathedral. This I think I really loved, just in terms of the vastness of it, the fact that the height that they got up to. And this was where I got to meet up with Brian and Chelsea again, who'd managed to they bust on, having got better. Heading onwards, the end of September's already in sight. We're leaving Lyon. I said getting into cities is brilliant. Getting out of them is absolutely impossible. They don't seem to signpost it effectively at all. Although there's usually locals who will kind of yell at you. I think they're being friendly, but they obviously notice you're a peregrino who's looking lost, and you should be going that way when you're walking that way, sort of thing. I did come across this guy as I was leaving. Another example of just the Camino spirit. So I just walked, kind of coming through the edge of Lyon. Wasn't really sure I was on the right track because it was more of an industrial area. A lot of it was uphill. It was cold, and I was kind of going, I'm not quite sure about this. And he's on the edge of this industrial estate, and I go up, and he offers me a coffee. He offers me an orange juice. He tries to offer me a lot of breaded items, but I managed to communicate that no puedo como gluten, which was the only phrase I had learnt before I went. And then I go to pay, and he's like, oh, no, it's a donation. And so again, they just ask for a donation. They're not looking for you to set in a price, and they just want to bless the people. And obviously, it's funding what they're doing. But so it's amazing. So I kind of spurred on. I decided there was two options coming up out of Lyon, and I decided I was going to take the alternative route. So I kind of veered off kind of the orange dotted line, following the green one. And again, the sunrise was just amazing. Still the usual graffiti was kind of all around you. But I headed on to this place called Villa de Mazarif, which I'd been told, and the guidebook suggested there was a few good places to see there. So I thought, that'd be worth it. I'll go for it. It's got to be, a good idea sort of thing. So I get there, and things are looking up. I'm in a small room. Literally, this is the smallest room I get into. There's just 2 bunk beds, and in the end, there's just myself on one side and a guy from Germany called Braun on the other side. So brilliant. There's even a sculpture of Santiago out in the town square. So, that's the great sort of thing. That was it, really. There was nothing else to see. The church was shut. There was apparently a museum, but no one really could manage to find that. And they were digging up the main road as well, so you couldn't really easily get in or out. But it was a nice walk, and again, a bit of a different experience. Onwards the next day, I joined the main route. Was looking to rain, actually, so I quickly stopped to get my cover out for my bag, which up until that point, I'd had, I think, one day where it'd been slightly kind of wet, but I'd not really bothered. So I go to take my bag off, which is a bit of a palaver. You put it down, and I'm going to get the bag out, and then this window opens next to me, and this lady thrusts this bowl full of tomatoes at me. And she was speaking in Spanish, which I didn't understand either. But I got the kind of impression that she was being friendly. Very quickly realised that she wanted to give me some tomatoes. So I take a couple of tomatoes, the rain's getting heavier. I'm trying to get my backpack covered before it kind of starts to get wet. And she still encouraged me to take more tomatoes, so I take some more tomatoes. So I've now got like a handful of tomatoes, and I'm still trying to get my bag on. And she's still trying to give me more tomatoes to the extent that I just put them in my hat and take a couple more. Finally get up to go, and before I know it, she's poured the whole bowl in my hat. The picture is, by this point, I'd eaten, I don't know how many tomatoes. I think it was about 30 I counted in total. That was after I'd given some to other pilgrims who were near me at this point. But it was such an amazing moment of just that generosity, and how the Caminos are, for so many, it's a way of life. A lot of the villages wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the pilgrims coming through. They would no longer be there. And that is one of those concerns that they have in some of them, because as the age of the residents are getting older, there's going to come a point where there'll be actually no one living there. So anyway, I head on, having eaten my tomatoes. The rain didn't last, thankfully, but the roads were very dusty. Again, this kind of, you're not quite sure which country you're in, because you've gone from kind of hills to woodlands to this dusty kind of outback almost. And then kind of coming up the top of the hill, I then came across this place called Catina la Casa de los. And this was, again, another place where there was a vastness. You can't see from the photos, but there's like on the right-hand side, that table thing people are gathering around was full of all types of fruit, of cheese, of meat. There was various chocolates and that sort of thing. And then the green thing was full of drinks. And again, it's all kind of just give a donation. But there was a great atmosphere as people were connecting again with others they'd not seen or that sort of thing. And then kind of after a while heading on, I reached Astorga. I managed to get a bed in Astorga. I was just along there on the left. This is up in the rooftop. There was very much kind of, sometimes there was a bit of a bed race. And you didn't almost realize till you got to a place. This one particularly, that wasn't the Municipal. We turned up at the Municipal, which was like over 100 beds, waiting for 12 o'clock for it to open. As it opened, they said it's full, because there was a busload of 90 kids, bless them, who just rocked up. And so for the next few days, we had these children just kind of leapfrogging, and you'd have to try and guess that sort of thing. They were kind of up there with cyclists who weren't always thought of in the best vein on the Camino, particularly one morning when the guy was cycling along and it's in the dark, and he's got no lights, he hasn't got a bell, and someone, you hear the call of bike, and everyone like dives for the hedgerows sort of thing. Michael, who I was with, managed to kind of take a step to the left or right, I'm not sure which it was, and obviously the bike was, almost hit the bike sort of thing. And the guy was like saying, well, if you only stayed and walked in a straight line, you'd be fine, sort of thing. At which point we held Michael back, who I think would have literally taken the cyclist out at that point. But I was, got to bed, got my drying done. That is from like the first floor you're hanging. That's about one of those pulley systems. And so every place is different. And in Astorga, you've got obviously the cathedral. There's the Gaudi castle. Also found an Irish bar, just to balance it out, sort of thing, in case what you're looking for. More gluten-free options. So anywhere that had a good gluten-free supermarket store, I was always a happy boy. The other thing you notice along the way, as you've been to kind of Europe, you see, would be the murals that would be painted all over the place. This is, I think, one of my favourite ones that I saw. Just absolutely stunning. On all sorts of kind of edges of buildings and that sort of thing. It was also in Astorga that I joined someone called Karen. She was married to Lance and Nala, visiting a chocolate museum. Who knew? Astorga was a real centre for chocolate. So, I went along. To be fair, I did bring some back for Emma, which actually lasted 2 bars from that point onwards. I did initially think I'd get some kind of hot chocolate to take back, because then that won't melt. But when they gave me a kilogram bag as the smallest bag, Karen said to me, you don't want to be carrying that for the next 2 weeks. So I went for a couple of bars of chocolate instead. Sort of thing. Another morning, another sunrise. This is where I stopped for my second breakfast in Rabanel. Many were heading onwards, but I wanted to stop here particularly because this was where the albergue, one of the albergues, was run by a British fraternity. I signed up to one before I went. And so I went and I enjoyed a cup of Yorkshire tea, genuine Yorkshire tea at 4 p.m. and a log fire, and meeting people, a number who were kind of, from the UK, but also people who were hosting it, who would come out for periods to run it and that sort of thing. Interestingly, they started this albergue back in 1991 because there was a 50-kilometre stretch where there was nowhere to stop. And so they wanted to add this in as an extra break, and it's been going since then. The other reason I kind of got there was I knew that the next day, though, I wanted to get up early. I wanted to head up to a place called Cruz de Ferra before sunrise. If you were here this morning, I was talking about that, the Iron Cross. And I really wanted to get there, kind of ideally just before the sun rose, so you could see it with the sunrise and that sort of thing. So I'm walking out of Rabat now, and I'm walking along, and there's a lady just a bit ahead of me sort of thing, and so I kind of passed her by. I'm kind of focused. I want to keep going. I want to get there. I want to go about 6-7K, I think, to just the next village, at least to get, and then a bit further. And then I stopped. I can't remember what I was doing, but I was sorting something in my bag. She passes me by, and then I carry on walking, and then I suddenly hear this noise coming from just off the track. And it is, without shadow of doubt, one of the most scariest things I've ever heard. It was a growling noise that was not a dog or anything like that. It wasn't anything kind of friendly, and it certainly wasn't anyone having a laugh. I'm pretty certain it was a bear, literally just off the track. She heard it, I heard it. We both started walking much quicker, and kind of, you didn't run, but you're like, okay, let's just keep going. And you have that moment of thinking, can I outrun her? Or, if this turns or that sort of thing. So as we're walking at quite a pace at this point, we start chatting. I say chatting. I did learn her name was Angela. She's from South Korea. She speaks Korean, Italian, and French. She doesn't speak English. I speak English. I don't speak French, Italian, or Korean. Our conversation was very stilted, and then some. But we kind of headed on, and after a while, she actually got quite out of breath because we were going quite fast, sort of thing, and it was all uphill, sort of thing. I felt a bit bad because after a while, I then left her, and then a bit later on, I was thinking, I hope she was all right, and I never actually saw her again. But I'm sure she's fine. But I met up with people later on, and I told them this story, and they're like, are you sure it was a bearette? Are you sure? You just not, it was some kind of dog or someone messing around, that sort of thing. Got back after my trip, and a few days later, Brian messaged me an article from the Guardian newspaper that had come out on the 11th of October. And in this article, it says, the Spanish police guide bareback from city centre to mountains. That was in Ponferrada, which is not that far from Rabat now. And in the timing of it would actually fit. So I'm just kind of, someone who survived a bear attack, as the story is now developing, who was at least, we were talking about on WhatsApp today, it was at least, I think I said 15, Brian reckons probably 20 feet tall, so nothing else. But moved on to Cruz de Ferra, a powerful marker on my journey, amazing views, and just the landscape changed again as I travelled. Joining others, we stopped for probably the best tortilla, or one of the best tortilla along the way. It was hard to remember which was the best tortilla because you kept enjoying quite a lot of it, sort of thing. Headed for this place called Molinesca, which apparently the writing on it said it's the most beautiful place in Spain, or something like that. And it was actually pretty nice. As we walked on, it was glorious. We weren't stopping there, though, because we decided again to kind of go a little further, because we wanted to get to Ponferrada, where there was a Templar castle. Now, this had an amazing albergue that was well kitted out, or I'm led to believe, on the basis of the meal that the friends I was with cooked that evening. I wasn't involved in that, because I was off having a tour of the castle. Brian was really into kind of the Camino and the Templars, and he's actually written 3 books, which are a bit like, I'd almost compare them to kind of Bernard Sharp. They're based on the Camino, set in the time of the Templars. And he's actually just released his 3rd one. And he actually read a kind of the prologue of it at one point while we were resting up one day, which someone did actually film.
Hung in the air. Arnold took a putrid breath and rounded the corner, weapons drawn.
That's
At
Michael.
the base of the column lay Paulo's severed head,
That's
staring
me
at
just
him. His
taking it
eyes,
in.
which had been so full of life moments earlier, were now transfixed with a look of horror. Tears filled Arnold's wrinkles like Paula's blood filled the cracks in the floor. Were those screams, were they real? To his left, there was movement.
I wasn't asleep, just for the record. I was listening, and I would recommend them. I'm reading through them on Kindle at the moment. But it was amazing walking around the castle, taking it all in, and then finishing off with a meal of, again, gluten-free or sin-gluten tortillas, which brought me to the morning of the 2nd of October. So there's not long to go now. The squad, as we've called ourselves, there's 7 of us, headed on. And at this point, we begin composing, under Brian's guidance, the Camino Shuffle. This was his 5th time on the Camino. And so there was a song that he'd come up with on a previous experience, which you kind of add verses to, which we'll come back to a bit later. But walking on, you'd kind of spend time maybe as a whole group, and then maybe you'd kind of break into 2s and 3s, and you'd maybe chat to some people. And it was great to really, you'd have time to really get to know individuals. And that real challenge, I suppose, to me, actually so often in life, it's easy just to kind of have snippets of conversation and not actually give people your full attention or actually really get to know who they are, what they're going through, and all that life is for them. This is someone called Betsy, who I walked a fair bit of the journey with. She's actually from Essex. She did A-levels this summer and decided she didn't want to go to university. It's not what she wants to do, but thought she'd go travelling. So she was there. And actually, along with Betsy, Brian, Chelsea, and myself that day, we headed on to an alternative route again. This one was up through the mountains. The actual route took you by like kind of a main road, but we pressed on from the kind of the end point of a section and decided actually we'd keep going. So about 2 p.m, we headed up into the mountains. Little warm, let's be honest. So here's me pausing by, shade for one of the many drinks breaks, but stunning views and no one else around. And again, there were so many moments where you just wouldn't see anyone, and particularly on some of the alternative routes. Here's the others also taking a break. At this point, I think it was just after this that Brian realised he'd put his bag down in a load of animal stuff, which is, again, just experience the full kind of Camino, thing. We walked on. And this little place we arrived at, we were heading for Trabadello, but it was about 2k out. And in the middle of this, you might be able to spot there's a yellow building, very small. They were still a bit way out, something. But we headed on to there. That was an albergue. I don't know whether it was just because it was a hot day and we'd been walking a long way and it'd been uphill and that sort of thing. But it has to be, they serve one of the best smoothies I have ever had. It's just absolutely glorious. As I say, it was a wonderful day. And we kind of stopped there briefly, then headed on downhill to Trabadello and the end of our day. Next morning we pressed on. And again, I say this was not an end point of a route, so we had a bit of a different, shorter distance the next day. But you discover lots of different places along the way. And I think one of my reflections, if I went back, was I would very much want to stop off the end points where possible, because you could meet some great people. This was Vagabond Vieiras. They had a wood-burning stove by the roadside. That's what we spotted, which in a cold morning is just what you want. So we went and we sat there, and it's run by a guy called Dave and his wife. He's from LA, and he walked the Camino and then wanted to come back. And so again, was just so friendly, welcomed us in. We started cooking stuff up and just all, again, Donativo, donation-based, don't worry, it's absolutely fine sort of thing. And as we headed on from there, as kind of the light appeared, we were Osabrero brand, almost kind of had an Austrian feel as we start to rise through the mountains. Absolutely amazing. And this was where we headed into the third kind of segment in terms of entering Galicia. And Osabrera, as we arrived, was, we went to the municipal there. So there's another queue of people waiting to get in. And I took a picture of these are the showers, because this was quite a special place because there were no doors on any of the showers. Now, you get to know people very well on the Camino, and you get used to just sleeping in a room with a load of other people that you've never met before and all that sort of thing. But there are experiences that are meant to be private, in my opinion. But it was also interesting how different people cope with it. This was the place where I shared a room with 55 other people. So there was 26 or 28 bunk beds in one room. And there was a group of about 50 from one country, I won't say where they're from, but who also decided to just kind of get up very early. One of them had a flashlight, which was like some kind of lighthouse. So everyone at 6 a.m. the next morning knew it was time to get up, sort of thing. Although some were kitted out better than others, this albergue wasn't at all. The kitchen literally consisted of the kitchen units. That was it. So any hope of cooking or any of that sort of thing. But it was the moment that I felt vindicated for taking a knife and a chopping board, which some had said, that's a bit of an overkill, you don't need that, Ed. And up until this point, I hadn't used it. But it did come into its own. Osabrera was a very quirky place. The building on the right was actually the shop. It had Wi-Fi and was even showing Friends in Spanish. So you could sit there, or you do your shopping on your phone and watch a bit of Friends going on, sort of thing. But it was that night that I went to one of the pilgrim's blessings. Most places, after Mass in the evening, there would be a pilgrim's blessing. And this one was a really special church, partly because if you look at that, there's actually only one cross kind of up there. But through the lighting, you have the two thieves either side. But also it was really special because at that one, the priest, he gave everyone a little stone with an arrow on it and talking about how very much this is your own personal walk. Take one because this is your path. Yes, it's similar to many others, but actually it's about the journey that you are going on. That next morning, we watched and waited for the sunrise to come up, looking over the valley from this vantage point before we headed down. And a lot of it was actually up and down much more than I'd thought. I didn't realize the extent to which you would not be just going flat, but constantly up and down, up and down, up and down. This next one is where you see the running of the bulls, take two. Obviously, it's a photo, so it doesn't really capture the terror in Betsy's eyes. I didn't realize, in one of those, oh, it's funny, isn't it, moments, I realized it wasn't funny, and she is terrified. And I kind of, at one point, thought, oh, I know, there's some bulls running there. I can run past them, and then I can tell people I've run with bulls. So I do that, at which point this bull kind of starts veering towards me, and I then really start to run, which is why I'm ahead at this point as well, thinking, okay, that was a stupid idea. Moving on, we reach Tricasella that night. This was an albergue where all the doors, they did have doors, so it's a positive. All the doors, though, were like saloon doors from westerns. So if anyone went to the toilet in the night, you'd hear this, fa-dong, fa-dong. And if you're trying to go to the toilet, or you're like, you've got to firstly work out, is someone in there? And so you're trying to half peer through without obviously peering through, because there's no idea whether anyone's in there the whole time, sort of thing. So again, a unique experience. As was the meal that night, which took over 3 hours to arrive. This was actually, it was a tastier paella, and we're heading in the right direction. Still kind of not quite there, but a bit better than the one I had previously that was just really rice, and that was it, sort of thing. The next morning, we head on, and I did have one of the best tortillas. This was cooked fresh by the guy in the cafe where we stopped. Often they were just heated through, whereas, if you're ever over there, I'll give you the location and you can head there for it, sort of thing. Stopping just before the 100K mark, so 100K to go. This is with myself and Erin and Leanne from the US. Again, as the 7 of us had kind of drifted that morning, then we kind of all grouped together so we could actually head on and mark at the 100K as one. From that point on, the markers are much more accurate. So you have a clear sense of where you're going. So across the top, you've got from the left, you've got Michael, Betsy, myself, Erin, Chelsea, Brian, and Leanne. And we're obviously at 100K to go. At this point, the place starts to get a lot busier because a number of people, you can just do the last 100K. All the way along, you've got one of these, which is your credential. And everywhere you go, you have to get stamps on it. So here's one that I've got stamped because I've stopped at an albergue or I've gone to a cafe or a church. And I actually kind of filled one up. Because it wasn't double-sided, I had to get a second one, which I then started filling. Now, if you walk the last 100K and get 2 stamps a day, you can hand this in at Santiago and you can still get a certificate. So suddenly you notice there are a lot more people on the road. We kind of head on a bit more. Porto Marion is one place we stopped. Michael and I had a bit of a stair competition, which was again a bit stupid, of seeing who could race up the stairs at this point. But this was also where there was an amazing church, some fantastic ice cream, and various things written on bunks. There were other times we noticed it, but this was one place where lots of people had written on the underside of the bunk beds. Usually just their name, and so I added my name and the date and that sort of thing. But there were other ones that were quite entertaining. One that I kind of, if I'm honest, I think could be quite good on a T-shirt. But obviously the 100K mark, just to give you context, is near Sarria. And someone had written, Jesus didn't start at Sarria. Which kind of gives you a sense as well of the two groups that kind of emerge at this point. Those who have started, back in St. John, and those who are only starting in Sarria. And it is genuinely a great lesson in grace, because it's so easy to fall into this trap of thinking, you're not doing this properly, are you? I've been here for weeks. But I've worked through that, and it's okay. But it was actually waking up the day, the next day actually started looking like this. And it was the first day that had been really misty. In the dark, walking in the mist is really quite eerie because you can't actually see beyond your torchlight, or you can't really see your torchlight. But we walked on. There's graffiti all the way along. This was one that repeatedly Michael Jackson had chosen to scrawl his name on parts of buildings or signs. Pretty much the entire way. There was like 2 or 3 things you guarantee you'd see most days written by someone. The mist continued. We, though, decided a bit later on once it cleared, so Michael, myself, and Brian take a bit of a detour just off route to this church, which is supposedly linked to the Knights of Santiago. In one of those kind of fluke accidents, we managed to get in because there was an electrician who was doing some work, and so the door was open for 5 minutes. So we kind of went in, and then he got rid of us, sort of thing. But some amazing items inside, and again, that you just kind of get up close and personal and see some of the history and the heritage. And outside, actually, as well, we'd been followed by this dog at this point for probably about 3K. We discovered Michael really loves dogs at this point, to the extent that he was starting to search on his phone, because the dog had no collar or anything, how he could get her home and take her with him. Lance and Karen were with us at this point. At one point, Lance just picks the dog up and throws him over the hedge, trying to get rid of him so he can run off. But she finds us again. I've got video footage of Michael, which is just so funny, because he's just like in this moment. In the end, the dog disappears, and we carry on walking. We've probably got another 6K or so. We've got to our albergue that night, and we're coming out to go to the shop to get some food. We walk out, and the dog is there. And Michael is just beside himself, and we're just like, what's going on? Sort of thing. We decided to cook, though, as a squad, Michael, myself, and Betsy. And I think it's fair to say it was probably the most stressful cooking experience of my life. For a lot of reasons. One is because there was hardly any equipment. So I was cooking the chicken, and I literally had a fork that is like one you'd give to a toddler. That was all. There was just nothing else, sort of thing. And you've then got other people wanting to use the room, and they're wanting to come in and go, is there other cutlery? Is there other things? And we're like, well, obviously we would have been using that if there was. You've then got people who come in and give you their advice on how you should cook, and that sort of thing. So I think my face captures kind of now that I've just kind of given up, really, by this point. The food has been served, and I've reached the end of it, sort of thing. As I say, lots more pilgrims joining the journey. We kind of paused at this one place where there's the best falafels I've had outside of the Holy Land. They were absolutely glorious, with various types of hummus as well, and that sort of thing. And as you're walking through these various places, you see all sorts of things. This, you may be aware, is a grain or a food store that you'd have. And it wasn't until later on someone pointed out this is what they'd use to keep stuff away from kind of like the vermin and that sort of thing. But there was a real sense by now that there's an end is in sight, and the conversations start to change. You kind of, not necessarily by yourself a bit more, but you're kind of working through, actually, we're drawing closer to Santiago. And so it's kind of, you know, on the penultimate day, I was starting to work this through. And I actually, at this point, walked up and met these two ladies from the US who I felt really convicted because they were just doing the last 100K. They were both in their 70s, though. So I had nothing against them. And had a lovely conversation with them. And it was great. Again, just this moment of connecting with these two ladies, one from Colorado, one from South Carolina, and just sharing this experience, being able to, in this brief moment, talking about who I am, what I do, why I'm out there, that sort of thing. And it was there, actually, as well. They'd been at this stall in the middle of this woodland. This guy was selling refreshments and that sort of stuff. And actually, I managed to get a stamp that was like an old-school wax stamp in my credential. Heading on, though, I stopped for kind of a healthy lunch, you know, a nice quality salad, having eaten probably too much junk, before reaching Villemort and the last night before we headed on. And so this is then the start of our last day. You can actually see there's a comparison here between the first day and the last day. The bags are a little bigger, the face is a little grislier, and it was the first day that it properly rained. We'd gone the entire time. This is Michael in his poncho, which didn't really work, and Chelsea. And Chelsea has got a plastic bag on her head, but purely because she's got dreadlocks. So she walked the last day with this bright green, which at least matched her top, I guess, sort of thing. And kind of we walked on, and before long, you kind of reach the edge of the city. But as with all the cities, they take a long time to get into. I mean, you picture London, you reach the edge of London a long time before you get to the centre of London. So you're walking on, and there's various streets you're going through. And again, just the emotion of the moment starting to build, and the experience of it. You're following the signs. You start to see in the distance the cathedral, which is the end point of the Camino de Santiago, and you come under this arch, and this was the experience. That's a guy called Christian pretending to be a bagpipist. Usually there's a bagpipist who, from 10 a.m. till 6 p.m, plays people into the square. He wasn't there at that point because we were there about 9:15, and it was raining as well. But what was amazing was because of the time of day and the weather, the square was just completely empty. There was hardly anyone around. And so you just have this moment when you're suddenly starting to work through all the last 5 weeks has held. The different places you've been, the sheer aches and pains in your legs, the people you've met along the way, and you're just kind of soaking in that achievement, really, of actually I made it. You know, I planned to do it.
It was about time, man. I'm waiting for you 1 hour in the pouring rain. Wonderful.
Yeah.
A hug for him.
Yeah, I deserve it.
Chris was someone who I'd met up with.
Yeah, we met
previously.
yesterday. How was the walk?
And we'd exchanged
Yeah, you get a walk
messages
too.
and
You
that
get a
sort of
hug.
thing. And
Everybody
he'd
gets a hug in
arrived
Santiago.
the day before, as he said.
Yeah, you get a hug. All that you need. Wonderful,
Now that was
guys.
that was our moment. It just keeps going, doesn't it?
Sorry, that's
that was
not
our
satisfying,
moment
but it's
of
like this.
arriving.
It's Monday, no?
And
It
then
doesn't want
this,
to work.
if you click on you, and this is me in front of the cathedral, having made it. And that's kind of the point that you are seeking to get to. And in that moment, I said there's a whole load of things going through your mind. You then head off and head to get your Compostela, which is now a lot more kind of mechanized and automated. You hand in your credentials, you fill stuff in on a computer, and that sort of thing, and then you wait to receive this. So I've got 2 certificates. One which says I walked 779 kilometers from Jean-Pierre-de-Port, and then one which is my Compostela. And this is the certificate that proves that I've done it. They write it in Latin, and they translate your name into Latin. So for henceforth, I shall be known as Edmundum Jones. Please use my full title. And it's this really weird moment because you've then suddenly arrived. And we gathered back out in the square as kind of the squad, and then headed off to get some tortilla. Brian said there was this one place you got to go for tortilla that is basically where whatever you buy to drink, tea, coffee, or something like this, sin gluten cerveza, to celebrate, you get tortilla on the side. And it was just, I don't know whether it was the moment or because it was, but it was the best tortilla I had of the entire time. It was amazing. After that, we headed to the Pilgrim Mass that happens at the time we were there, it's happening, I think, twice a day. In the height of summer when it's really busy, it will happen more than that. The day I arrived, there was 1,832 pilgrims registered. Prior to even just a week before, they'd been up to 2,500. In the summer, it was nearing 3. And that's from a number of different Camino walks that converge on Santiago. But you start to meet people, so I met back up with the Dutchman, Robert. He arrived, and I went off to celebrate that evening, enjoyed some polpo. If you've never had octopus, it's a glorious experience. And then just the next day, on my day waiting, just spent watching other people arrive, which may sound really dull and boring, but is one of the most amazing things, because you're just watching others gather, and other people who maybe you knew. So Maggie, from day one, came in the next day after me, so I met up with her. And you're just kind of seeing all these different connections that you've made across the last 5 weeks. We went and toured the cathedral. Again, an amazing building. Seeing the different things where they kind of believe the bones of St. James rest. And you get to see the kind of the swinging incense as well. I enjoyed a final do-it-yourself lunch in the square one more time. By this point, though, being kind of starting to pack, I packed my Swiss Army knife in my kind of bag that was going to be the carry-on, so I suddenly realised I didn't have that, so that was a bit difficult getting into it. But it's amazing how kind of, you can be if you need to get into a packet of food when you're hungry. And you just start to say goodbye to people. You're sitting around, you're starting to, those you'll probably never see again, those that I'm still in touch with, those that you've become kind of Facebook friends, which is now just added to the list. And then that night I actually went for another pilgrim mass with a friend who wanted to go, and he said, well, I go with him. And we actually sat very close to the front this time, literally where the incense was flying over us. And that was a very special time, just being with him. Before walking past the cathedral one last time that evening, and then heading home on the 12th of October. Pretty much 5 weeks to the day since I'd left. Now, another question that kind of was asked a lot was, what are you looking forward to when you get home? For me, dinner was something I was looking forward to. Fresh vegetables, something not in a stew, or kind of, which was always lovely and that sort of thing. But more so for me, I really look forward to obviously seeing Emma and the kids. And for me, that last week got harder in some respects, because you're then kind of there wanting you back and you're actually ready to get home. And for me, I think being with that group really helped. But also the massive support that they were. We kind of video called once a week, was how we kind of kept in touch. I did a video each Wednesday of an update on my beard, or lack of one really, and then we'd message and that sort of thing. But I do have one final video in a moment to show you, and then please do head into the Manor House, enjoy a bit of cake and a cup of tea or coffee. Again, massive thank you to Emma, who has baked and done all that sort of stuff. I take no credit for that sort of thing. But before that, there's one question I've not answered, which is, why did I walk? And it was a question that I was even answering the last night in Santiago. Sitting around a table, there was about 7 or 8 of us in this restaurant, some of who I'd not kind of known before. I'd met, but only briefly, and I'd been invited to join them, and so I was sitting around and had this really in-depth conversation even that night as to why was I walking. And for me, the best way I described it was actually, in short, it was actually that retreat, which may sound a really odd thing, because retreats should be restful and relaxing, or we might think they should be. But for me, it was that space. It was that space out with God, It was an adventure. I loved it. Not shying away from it. I loved the walking and the staying in different places and meeting people and eating stuff and all those sorts of things. You know, and all that I, you know, wouldn't imagine that I would have experienced. I loved all the sunrises, the friends I met, the sights I saw. But for me, it was that space to pause and reflect, to pray, to talk with God, to have an experience of a lifetime. And I'm just so grateful that I got to do it. It was something that took a lot of planning, but came together. And for me, I'm still kind of working through some of the things, as I shared this morning, that God has said to me on it, some of the reflections. As I said, I kept a journal throughout, which was hard work, but I wanted to be as detailed as possible so I can actually go back and look at it and reflect on the different things that I got to experience. But I do want to finish with one video, and it captures for me so much of the trip. This is the Camino Shuffle. One morning, as I said, we were walking along, and the first couple of verses you'll recognize, or were the classic ones that Brian had come up with on previous trips. And then you're invited to create your own kind of verses. This is actually quite a while after we'd come up with them, and we decided to actually record them. So this is the Camino Shuffle 2022 edition.
Wait, okay. Oh, the Camino's ahead of us, Camino's behind. My friends walk beside me, stepping in time. There's pilgrims on the Camino, they get blisters on their feet. They do the pilgrim shuffle when their legs are beat. Oh, the Camino's ahead of us, Camino's behind. My friends walk beside me, stepping in time. Ed takes tortilla, he is a big fan. But when he orders it's in pan. Oh, the Camino's ahead of us, the Camino's behind. My friends walk beside me, stepping in time. We stay at the municipals, where bunk beds are loud. We do communal dinners and draw quite a crowd. Oh, the Camino's ahead of us, Camino's behind. My friends walk beside me, stepping in time. There's a girl named Betsy, and she's got lots of socks. And all the boys think that she's a fox. Oh, the Camino's ahead of us, Camino's behind. My friends walk beside me, stepping in time. Ah, Camino.
So thank you very much for listening. I'm more than happy to chat and answer questions, but let's do that over a bit of cake and something to drink. So thank you very much.